Hello, everybody. My name is Matthew Smith. I'm the Managing Director of Complete Tenders, and this is our third webinar in our sort of business growth series, where we are very much helping particularly small businesses with understanding the tender process. This particular session is looking at making an informed decision about the tender at hand, to bid or not to bid. Is this particular opportunity right for my business? To help me today is our operations manager, Karen Shuttleworth, and behind the scenes is Sharon, who will help with the sort of follow-up processes and is handling the slides today. If you have any questions at any time, if you want to use the chat function, we will take questions at the end, and we will help answer those. So if there's a raise your hand function as well. If you look at, I think it's in reactions, you can put your hand up in there, and then we will come to you at the end. Other than that, if you can just stay on mute for the time being, and then once we get to questions, we can sort of have a bit more of an open discussion. So you found a tender opportunity, and you want to really understand whether that particular opportunity is the right one to invest in. Obviously, with any kind of speculation or drive towards bringing in more business, you want to try to understand as much as you can about whether this particular thing is going to be right, whether it's worth your time and money and energy investing in it. So we're going to take you through what is a typical set of tender requirements, and at the end of it, hopefully you will have a fairly useful tool in a checklist that you can then use to assess the opportunities that you have, and hopefully make more informed decisions about which are the opportunities that are more of a priority, which ones are probably going to be better for you to invest in than others. I suppose the first thing to highlight is that there are lots of opportunities out there, and this week, as the 2023 Procurement Act has come in on Monday, the 24th of February, there are more opportunities today than there have been probably in the last 3 or 4 months, where procurement teams have all kind of withheld their tender notices until the system that was updated over the weekend has changed. So if you haven't sort of found opportunities but you're familiar with the process of looking, then please do have a look this week, because there's been some significant kind of a growth in numbers of tender opportunities out there. So we'll just sort of crack straight on. Here is the agenda. So we're going to be looking at a set of criteria that you can use to assess a tender opportunity. We're going to look at specification, things like location, value, timescales, compliance, evidence, social value pricing, type of contract, and the effort required, which will all help you to make a decision one way or the other. And again, ultimately, it sort of comes down to, well, if there are too many no's on this, then you simply move on to the next opportunity. I suppose that one of the best things about particularly the public sector is that contracts don't last forever, and what isn't right for you now might be right for you in a year's time or 2 years' time. And there are always kind of other opportunities around the corner. So if there are too many no's at this stage, you've at least kind of not sort of spent the time and money and energy on the wrong opportunities. Right, so I'll let Karen take over now. We're going to sort of shuffle around and talk about these things between myself and Karen. So Karen, if you'd like to crack on with the first criteria, please.
Okay, thanks, Matt. Okay, so the first thing really to check when you're analysing a tender is to actually look at the specification. You know, what does the buyer actually want the supplier to do? Now, this slide just shows a typical set of tender documents, basically. It won't always look like this, won't always be as clear cut. There might be more documents, there might be fewer documents. But in there somewhere will be the specification. And this one, it's called Part 3 specification. It could be part of a different document, but there will be somewhere that lists out what the buyer is looking for. And it's key, it's absolutely key. You need to read all of that and make sure that whatever it is that they are asking suppliers to do, you can deliver. Because if it's mandatory to deliver all of it and you can only do some of it, then this one isn't for you. If you feel you can deliver all of it, then fantastic. You need to move on to all the other considerations that we'll go on to. One thing I would say at this point is if actually it's not very clear in the specification, there's always the opportunity to ask questions of the buyer. So the portal you downloaded the documents from will have the functionality to ask a question. So if you want to clarify part of the specification, you can, and wait for the response before making a decision as to whether you can deliver everything. And use that functionality, I would say, whenever you're trying to figure out whether you want to go for a tender or not.
Just as an example of that, again, there's sort of you don't always need to be able to meet 100% of the specification. If you can meet 90% of it, and there are some elements that are a little bit speculative that you're sort of happy to try to develop and those kind of things, then that is also something that is worth sort of saying yes to. Or, on the other side of the coin, if the specification includes something like a particular piece of software that must be used as part of your quality control process, and you don't have that piece of software, is it worth investing in it? Or is it, you don't use that management system and therefore, okay, let's rule this project out and just, and go with a different one.
Yeah. Okay, next one, I think, Sharon, please.
Okay, so again, this slide just shows a sort of a typical set of time requirements. Every tender is different, but they all have some form of time frame set out in it, i.e. when is the deadline for the submission. That's obviously the most important date on there. There are a series of other dates, and of course when we're looking at dates, we want to make sure that we've got a decent amount of time to prepare properly and do a quality job. If the tender is due in 3 days' time and you haven't even looked at the documents, I would suggest that opportunity has been and gone, and there is no point scrambling around trying to sort of do something on it. Typically, you've only ever got the best part of 30 days to respond to a tender. So when you are making a yes/no bid decision, when you are deciding upon whether to follow up with this opportunity and tender, you want to be trying to make that decision on day 1, 2, 3, rather than day 28, 29, 30. So that's the sort of the timescale consideration, is have I got enough time to be able to do a proper job? It's all a competitive process. Where do I perceive my competitors started on this project? If you've done this sort of thing before, if you're used to tendering and you've got material to hand, you may be able to shorten that response window and be able to do something in something like 2 weeks. But starting from scratch, you know, with any kind of new tender project, you would want to give yourself as much time as possible to do it. Location is also a key aspect. You know, if you're a cleaning company and all of your team is in London, are you really going to be looking at tender opportunities in Glasgow at the start of, you know, the expansion of your business? If you're a care company in Enfield, are you able to deliver services in Newham, Tower Hamlets, Ealing, with the team and the, you know, the care staff that you have? Are those opportunities, you know, going to be better for you than kind of looking further afield? So geography comes in, and of course the value of the opportunity. Typically within the tender notice, it will give you a rough idea as to the overall value of the contract, whether that's per annum or over the 3-year contract period. And really that's gives you a kind of an at a glance understanding as to whether it's going to be worth your while winning that contract or not. You know, if you're used to delivering contracts of £250,000 and this contract is, you know, for 20 grand, and it's going to cost you 5 grand to produce the tender, then is that going to be worth it, you know, for you? Alternatively, you know, if you're a small business and you know, your turnover's £200,000, the general rule of thumb is that you need to have a turnover 2 times the contract value. So if the contract value is £200,000 and your turnover is £200,000, then the value of that particular opportunity might not be right for you. If your turnover is £200,000 and the opportunity is £100,000 per year, then that would sort of fit with the usual value requirements, the financial requirements. We'll come on to financial requirements a little bit later as well. But really at this first stage, you kind of want to know, is it worth your while, you know, winning this contract? Because essentially, you know, you don't want to be bidding for anything that, you know, is you know, going to cost you more than it's worth. Yes, so those are sort of 3 initial criteria that you can usually sort of pick up in the first 2 or 3 pages of the tender documents and on the tender notice. Next slide, please, Sharon.
Okay, so now compliance, the compliance aspect of tender requirements. So within the documents, there will be a list or a section, or maybe in the questions themselves, about any specific accreditations that you might need in order to tender. And the example on this slide here is actually taken from a tender that was split into 2 stages, the SQ stage and the ITT stage. And just the highest scoring bidders got taken through to the ITT stage. And you can see here that it's talking about the ISO accreditations 9001, 14001 and 45001, just as examples. Now, what this tender didn't say, they didn't say that you had to have 9001 and 14001, etc. But what happened at SQ stage was, you can see that in the result, you scored 5 marks for this piece if you had each of these accreditations, and you scored no marks if you didn't have them. So on this one, by having these accreditations, you've got 15 marks. By not having them, you have 0. And you need to bear this in mind when you're thinking about bidding. 1, is it mandatory to have it? And if it is, then, and if you don't have it, okay, move on to the next one. Or in this case, if you score more highly if you've got it, consider whether you think, can I make those 15 marks up somewhere else, for example. What I would say as well is, if you're reviewing a number of tender opportunities and they're all suggesting or requiring that you have a particular accreditation, take notes if you don't have it. And if you're finding that you're having to say no to an awful lot of tender opportunities because you don't have a particular accreditation, it might not be an ISO, it might be a different accreditation, then it's worth thinking about investing in getting that accreditation just to get you through this stage of tendering, if you're seeing that as a trend. So it's not just about looking at this tenders on an individual basis when it comes to accreditation, but actually all the tenders you're reviewing, if there are trends in the accreditations they're asking for, consider getting them.
Can I just add there? What we don't want to do is put you off by saying you need to have all of these accreditations in place before you start tendering. The point is that there is usually you know, an alternative to having these accreditations. As you know, for example, if you don't have the certificate, you might still score 3 points if you have a quality management system that you can demonstrate and talk about, and you've got a quality policy, those kind of things. So don't be put off if there is, you know, if there is a specific requirement to submit your ISO 9001 certificate and you don't have one, then obviously that is move on to the next opportunity. But if there are questions that relate to, you know, if there are alternatives, and quite often there are, then there are sort of ways around it.
Yeah. Okay, next one. So Matt alluded to this earlier in the values aspect of reviewing a tender opportunity. Sometimes there are financial thresholds that you need to pass. Now, the one on the left of this slide there is talking about the annual contract value versus turnover, and the standard is, as he said, you know, you need twice your turnover needs to be twice the contract value. And here it's actually spelled out on this particular example. But what this particular example also had in this tender was actually a more in-depth look at your accounts and your ratios and so on. Sometimes bidders even release a spreadsheet, a financial evaluation spreadsheet that you or your accountant need to fill in and make sure that you obtain a pass at the end. Now, sometimes this financial scoring matrix, this financial compliance, with this one here, I think you had to pass 3 of these 6 criteria. And I think on other occasions they might say, look, if it's a fail, it just means that we're going to do more in-depth financial checking. So it's not necessarily an outright fail, you can't bid, but you need to make sure that you understand if the buyer has any of these financial thresholds, financial requirements that you need to pass, because all the compliance aspect comes first. The buyer will check all the compliance aspects of it, and if you don't pass this first piece, they won't even review your tender responses. So you could have the best solution, the best answers, the best responses ever written, but if you've not passed the initial compliance aspect, then they won't read them. So it's just worth digging out all of this from the tender materials and making sure that you pass it.
And if you don't have, you know, if numbers aren't your bag, but you've got an accountant, then send it to them so that they can assess it and check that from a diligence perspective, it's worth your while continuing with the rest of the tender project.
Yeah.
Okay, so
sorry, just quickly as well, there might be some sector-specific compliance. Typically CQC, for example, some require you to have a good rating, or if you haven't, then you submit your evidence to show that you're working towards good and that you've got an improvement plan in place, and so on. But it's all about finding these requirements within the documentation and making sure that you meet them.
Yeah. So do I have the required evidence? Again, this is sometimes pass-fail. In other words, if you don't submit the required evidence, you will fail and the rest of your bid will be disqualified. Or sometimes evidence is part of the written response, and it is you know, a scored element. Winning and losing contracts is on typically fine margins, you know, 1%, 3%, that kind of margin. And producing the appropriate amount of evidence is key to making sure that, you know, you're scoring 4 out of 5, 5 out of 5 on your question, rather than 2, 3. So where they're asking for a case study, have you got those, you know, have you produced case studies for your website, for example? Can you elaborate on those? Have you got example management information reports, things that you've submitted to your clients previously that show how you've met your KPIs, that you're responding on time to inquiries, you know, call outs, that kind of thing? Have you got the appropriate policies? Typically, tenders will ask for your health and safety policy, a business continuity plan, a safeguarding policy if you're dealing with, you know, care or working within schools, you know, that kind of thing. Have you got an organisation chart? Most tenders will ask you about the team that you are proposing to use to deliver the contract. You know, so keeping an organisation chart up to date is something that, you know, you can sort of do in the background, so that when the time comes to tender, that you've got it to hand and you don't have to spend more time on that element. You can concentrate on, you know, doing the tender writing kind of part. Things like a training matrix, records, you know, evidence of your team, you know, NIC, EIC certificates, all of that kind of thing, is also something. All of these things that, you know, can be done kind of behind the scenes, so that you're saving time and able to focus your time on more important kind of elements of the tender exercise when the time comes. Statistics are also key in terms of evidencing how you have delivered a contract previously. What are the numbers? How successful were you? What were the outcomes that you were able to deliver? You know, that met the you know, a similar set of specified requirements. References are almost always asked for. In my experience, they ask for 3 previous contract references and check the first one. If the first one checks out, then they don't move on to the second and the third reference. However, you know, again, if the first one doesn't check out, then they might move on to the second one, and that sort of thing. And then things like risk assessments, method statements. You know, again, local authorities, NHS trusts, Ministry of Defence, housing associations are all very risk-averse organisations, and they want to know that whoever they're going to contract with is low risk. So if you have done risk assessments for part of your business, then, you know, sometimes submitting those is, you know, part of the requirement. So having those to hand and up to date is also something that can be done to, you know, ensure that you have a set of documents, materials that all help to evidence who you are and that you are worth contracting with. And of course, in this context, it's, you know, can I be working on those things in the background to enable me to say yes to more tenders in the future? Next slide, Sharon, please.
Okay, so social value. Well, we have a whole webinar dedicated to social value. So we need to keep this bit a bit brief rather than an entire webinar worth. But the next 3 slides basically give some examples of the type of social value question you might get asked in your tender. Now, social value can be worth a significant portion of the marks in a tender, 10% typically, sometimes higher. And we just want to talk about it here because when you're reviewing whether you should be going for a tender, you need to be looking at what are they looking for in terms of the social value requirements. And the questions asked around social value can vary significantly between tenders. So you might have put together a wonderful social value proposal for a tender previously, and then you come to the next one, you think, fantastic, well, I can just use that again, only to be confronted with an entirely different question, an entirely different format on an entirely different topic. So it's really important when you're looking at a tender to see what they're looking for in terms of social value. So the next 3 slides just kind of cover some examples that I'll very, very briefly go through. That first one, there was an Excel spreadsheet. They had predefined initiatives, and you had to choose which ones you were going to commit to, in what values. And the way that spreadsheet worked was it assigned a monetary value to all of them. So you ended up with like a number at the end, and the highest number got the most marks. It had to be backed up with narrative. Obviously, you can't just promise the earth and promise you're going to give them £100,000 worth of social value without explaining how. But that was fundamentally that one. Predefined initiatives, you commit to them, you explain how you want to do it, and that gets evaluated. Or on this slide, this particular buyer was talking about their own organisational social value priorities. So in this case, it's okay. So as a buyer, they have some social value priorities. There might be a council, there could be a housing association. Now, hopefully, they've released some documentation about what those priorities are. Otherwise, everybody's got to go hunting them down, look on their website, find out, etc. But this is asking for, how are you going to deliver them, deliver against those priorities? What are you going to do? Who's going to do it? How are you going to do it? When are you going to do it? How are you going to engage with local stakeholders? That's very different than filling in a spreadsheet with numbers against initiatives. And then the third example, we don't see these as much anymore. This is quite a generic, okay, what are you going to do? And cover 3 areas. So this isn't specific at all. This, in a way, if you've got things that you've previously done and that you can repeat, again, for this new contract that you're bidding for, this is where you've got a bit more leeway, really, with what you can offer, and it can be specific to you. You're not prescribed against. However, having said that, it is well worth looking at what the buyer, in this case the school, go on the school website, see what their priorities are, what are they interested in, how can you help them and personalise it to the buyer, even when you're not really prescribed in this case. But the social value aspect of a tender is important, and it's different every time. So yeah, well worth understanding what you need to do.
Okay, so the pricing element can be 50% of the marks, it can be 30%. And I think we move on to, there's a slide after this one, or in a couple of slides time, about weighting and the difference between between the pricing element and the quality element. But essentially, a lot of this sort of criteria is about weighing up how price sensitive your business is, and how that kind of relates to what the authority is looking for. Obviously, if you're, you know that you're at the most cost-effective end of the market, and if it's a 50% kind of weighting on price, then you could score very well on at least half of the tender in that aspect, and it might mean that some of the quality elements you don't need to do as much on. If you know that you're at the the sort of more what's the correct term, but at the higher end of the market from a price point of view, and you know that you're more expensive than other bidders, then a project with a 50% weighting on price means that you've got to do an awful lot on the quality element to try to balance out the fact that you're probably not going to come best on the price side of things. So that's sort of one thing. The second thing, of course, is is it profitable for us as a business? Will we make any money on it? Again, in years of experience with this, would not advise that you bid for anything that's going to be a loss leader for you. Like we've said, there are plenty of other opportunities, and if your margins are squeezed to absolute zero, then is it going to be worth your while? I suppose you could consider, okay, well, we go in at a break-even point today, and we try to build up a relationship with this particular authority. There may be opportunities to sell in additional products and services in the future, and therefore make our money back in a year's time or 2 years' time. But again, bear in mind that you're doing business with a public sector organisation, and no matter how much you try to build up that relationship, they are still bound to a tendering process or an open process. So those are really the sort of the two main considerations. But then when you see a pricing document, again, it can be a Word document that's just asking for your hourly rate. It can be a very detailed 17-tab Excel spreadsheet asking for a breakdown of every single cost imaginable. So again, it's just a question of kind of looking at the way that information needs to be presented and asking yourself, am I able to do this in a competitive way? And so those are really the sort of the considerations there. And of course, there are things like, do I need to pay real living wage, London living wage, those sorts of things? Is that going to take me away from being competitive on this project? If you're a cleaning business that is usually operating in Northampton, and you're paying your staff one wage, and this particular opportunity is in central London, where you're going to be required to pay the London living wage, is that going to mean that that opportunity isn't right for you, because that's going to make your financials at £2 per staff member more expensive than what your business is modelled on at the moment. Those are the sort of the key considerations there on pricing. Yes.
Okay, so the next one, there's not a huge amount to say here, but this is just making sure that you understand when you're looking at the tender, actually what type of contract is this? Is it direct award, i.e. there's one winner and that winner takes the contract and takes all the money on that contract? There's one supplier doing the work. Or is it one of the many forms of a framework or DPS, dynamic purchasing system, which is basically a group of suppliers or a set of suppliers who are pre-approved to do the work that the buyer wants? Now, it's important to understand when you're bidding what type of contract this is. Sometimes if you'll get on the framework, which is often a little bit easier than winning a direct award contract, because you don't need to come first. You can be, one of 10 suppliers on there. But you also need to understand then, so let's say you are one of 10 suppliers on the framework, how is that work split between those suppliers? Are they ranked? So does all the work go to the supplier who's ranked number 1, and only if they can't do it, does it go to number 2 and then number 3? Is it some kind of round robin where everybody gets the same? Is there so much work that there's 150 suppliers on this framework and you're all bidding for care packages on the framework, for example? But also what we find sometimes is people will ring us up and say that, look, I'm doing some work for this council, but now they've told me that in order to continue working for them, I have to be on this DPS or I have to be on this framework. And so that's when a lot of people have to try and start tendering for, say, the first time. We've not done it before, because they won't be able to carry on doing the work they're doing without being on that framework or that DPS. So when you're looking at the tender documents, make sure you understand what it is that, what type of contract it will be that's awarded.
So we looked at, so we've covered a sort of a series of criteria here. We have sort of covered a little bit about the weighting. And here we can see sort of two examples where we've got a quality score on the left-hand side that is sort of geared towards, both of them are a 50% price, and then you've got the other 50%. And obviously 25% is based on previous experience. If you're a startup business, or you've been in business 1 or 2 years, and the questions are around, demonstrating your previous experience, and you don't have any as the business that you have per se, but you have 25 years experience in nursing, and or that you've worked at other businesses before, can you leverage that type of experience to answer these tender questions appropriately? If you're a care company that has only done home care, for example, and this is about supported living or reablement type of care, can you, do you feel that you can effectively demonstrate previous experience in that area? So those kind of things are important considerations. On the right-hand side, we've got a more equal split where it's not all about previous experience. You might see questions about how will you deliver this? How will you allocate resources? How will you monitor performance? All of that is sort of future rather than about previous. So that type of opportunity might be more appropriate for a business with less experience out there. And again, it's about just trying to understand how the questions are being asked, and looking for that word will is sometimes a sort of a key trick, really. So yes, those are kind of the sort of the key things there. Every tender is scored slightly differently. Every tender is weighted slightly differently, and what goes for Hertfordshire County Council doesn't necessarily go for Welwyn Hatfield Council. What goes for an NHS trust in terms of needing previous experience compared to proposed service delivery will be different from what the Ministry of Defence want, that kind of thing. So again, it's about weighing up what the requirements are about your business capabilities and previous experience to make an informed decision.
Okay, so this one, now we've looked at all the requirements and so on, but now when you come to thinking, okay, this one's looking good, can I actually do this? I guess you're asking yourself, do I have the capacity? Do I have the time? Do I have the team members available in order to do this? One of the main considerations, well, all these considerations are here, but word count. So there's going to be some questions to respond to. In that previous slide, one of those tenders, I think, had 10 questions, one had 4. But what's the word count? Are each of those questions 500 words? Or actually, are they all 8 pages of A4? And suddenly you need to be submitting a 50-page proposal. You've got 3 weeks to put it together, and 2 of your staff members are on holiday who've got all the experience that you want to draw on. So do really understand what's the word count they're looking for, the page count or the character count, however they've worded it. How big are these responses? How much do you have to write? And who in your team can do it, or who in your team has the expertise and the knowledge to feed into those responses, and are they around? Have you done it before? Have you seen these questions before? So actually you've got this material. And importantly, that third bullet point, have you had previous feedback? Have previous buyers scored your responses, given you some feedback so you know how to improve them? Because you could be looking at, say, 10 questions, but 5 of them you've written previous responses to, and you've had some great constructive feedback. So you know how they'll score higher this time. All the additional requirements. So other than just answering the questions, do I need to put together a mobilisation plan? Do I need to do something specific for this tender? Do I need to put some kind of proposal together that's unique to these requirements, for example, not just to answer the questions, but actually create something as well? And then the last one, I've kind of alluded to that, team members' availability and priorities. Do you have some other important work on at the moment that actually is going to pull the people you need to do the tender away from the tender because they've got actual projects on that they need to do? And it all feeds into making a decision as to whether you can bid or not. You know, it could be a wonderful opportunity, but if you've not got the time and the capacity in your team, it's an extra consideration.
If I could just elaborate on the feedback question. Obtaining feedback is an extremely important part of the tendering process, and not everybody does it. And the importance of it, shouldn't be kind of held back on, really. It relates to the effort that is required. If you get feedback from your first tender, then the effort required on your second tender is less. If you get feedback on your second tender, then the effort required on your third tender should be less, because you're kind of making it easier for yourselves to understand exactly what the authority is looking for. And you are all entitled to a decent amount of feedback. You should be able to obtain feedback on why you scored 3 out of 5 relative to the winning bidder who scored 5 out of 5. You should be able to understand, related to the weighting, your total sort of score, and obtain comments from the evaluation panel. That is almost the most valuable part of your first couple of tenders. And if it can be like gold dust, because what you are obviously getting, what you're doing with your first couple of tenders is testing the market, and obtaining that feedback is extremely important for improving your answers each time, and making sure that all of that feedback is included in your second, third, fourth tender, so that ultimately you're on a pathway with every tender that you're submitting. If you're not winning the first one, second one, third one, at least you are improving each and every time, so that winning a contract should be inevitable at some stage. It might take 6 months, it might take 6 years, but if you're improving each time, then there's sort of nowhere to go but upwards. I just sort of saw that from Zainab there. I'll come to the questions in a minute, but whilst we're on it, if an authority tries to fob you off with you only scored 40 and the winning bidder scored 60, then you go back to them and you can quote parts of the procurement rules about obtaining feedback, and that they are obliged to provide you with an appropriate level of feedback. In most sort of tender, invitation to tender documents, they will explain the process afterwards. But that is something that you can kind of draft a letter that asks in a series of ways to have that feedback properly. So don't be fobbed off. Sometimes it takes 2 or 3 goes, and also the threat of going to the head of procurement or the chief executive of the council to ask for that feedback as per your right. Right, yes. So ultimately, you need to make a decision. Ideally, you're making that decision quickly to give yourself another 29 days to work on the tender if you're going to go ahead. And essentially, this is your tool. This is your checklist, and a summary of the slides that we've gone through. Can I do everything that's been requested? Are the location, value, timescales appropriate? Do I meet the financial thresholds? Is my turnover appropriate? Have I got all the accreditations, documentation required? Are they pass fail, or are they scored? Can I get away with not having an ISO 9001 certificate? Do I have the required evidence? I've got some evidence. I've got some management information reports that I can screenshot, but I don't have a lot of previous experience or evidence from part of this element of the specification. Can I meet the social value requirements? Well, we've got some good social responsibility. We're doing some good things in our local community, but I'm not sure how that can be applied to winning this particular contract in Manchester. What am I going to be able to do for the community in Manchester? Will it be profitable? Well, I've kind of looked at the financial, the pricing spreadsheets, and we've worked out that we can probably deliver this contract with the team that we've got to pay, and the equipment and the materials that we need to deliver, and still make a margin of 15%. So it's definitely a goer. How is the work awarded? Well, we might be on a framework, but there's only 8 businesses on that framework, and the contract is sizable. So it's still worth us going for. We think that we can score highly. We think that we're going to be quite competitive in the areas that we're good at. We've got really good quality management processes. Our health and safety is up to scratch. We might be a bit low on the environmental management side of things, but overall, we think it's worth going for. And do I have the capacity in my team? Well, I haven't got anybody else, so I'm going to do it, and I'm going to, make sure that I've got enough time over the next 3 weeks to pull something together and produce a high quality tender response. It may be that I can use, ChatGPT to help me write some elements of it, or I don't, and I'm going to call Complete Tenders to get some help writing this tender. If you can answer yes to most of those ticks, though, if you can answer yes to most of those questions, somewhere in there will be your threshold. Somewhere in there will be your kind of yes/no decision line, and it will change for different tenders depending on what they're asking for. But if you can say yes to most of those, and there aren't any what we call red flags, i.e. that you must have ISO 9001, or that you must have REC recruitment membership, and you don't have it, and it's going to cost you 15 grand to do it, is it a no-go? So really, this is the tool, this is the checklist to help you going forward, making decisions on bidding. There will, of course, be nuances depending on the sector. We talked about, CQC needing a good rating, that you need to have gas safe registered engineers, those kind of things but hopefully this is a relatively simple, straightforward set of criteria that you can look for in every tender opportunity, and reconcile this list against the requirements and make an informed decision. So that sort of concludes what we're talking about. I'll now go to the chat box first, and then anybody else that wants to raise their hand, then we'll answer your questions. So the first question is, how do you know that you've been accepted onto a council's framework? Well, you will always receive an outcome notification. So as long as you have registered, expressed interest, and submitted a tender, you will then receive the outcome, which will be in a letter, usually through the portal. Sometimes, well, in most instances, you will need to routinely check the portal that you submitted your tender through to check for the outcome. And of course, as we know, a local authority's estimated outcome date might not be as accurate as they say it is. You might be waiting another 3 months or 3 years for the outcome. I mean, typically, you know, it will be around the estimated date, but that's not to say that a council hasn't been known to withdraw a tender and not, you know, not inform bidders and that kind of thing. But you will get a letter notifying you of the outcome, and hopefully that is a positive outcome, and the feedback should be provided within that letter. Otherwise, you can go back to them, usually through the messaging portal, to ask them for feedback. Can you please explain why, what the scoring was, so that you can assess why you only scored 3 out of 5 on that question, or what disqualified you from the tender, that kind of thing. Of course, it's also important, if and when you win a contract, that you also obtain the feedback as to why you scored 5 out of 5 on that question, so you can make sure that you're repeating it. Second question. Related to the frameworks provided, can you shed more light on the DPS and other types of framework that exist with their drawbacks? Yes, so there are positives and negatives. I suppose on the negative side, you can be one of 250 people on the digital outcomes framework, central government, for example. You can be one of 35 temporary recruitment suppliers on a framework or a DPS. However, what the frameworks and DPSs, so the negative side is that it doesn't guarantee you any work by being on that framework to start with. However, what it does do is it gives you that kind of badge, and it gives you the opportunity to have conversations with the authorities and with the councils and with the NHS trusts that are possibly asking you, well, you need to be on a framework. So it's a kind of, you've got to be in it to win it sort of thing. Also with some frameworks, you may have seen on businesses' email footers that they are a government approved supplier. They are on the NHS SBS supply chain framework. They are on this framework. They are on that framework. So it kind of gives you a badge like an ISO badge would have, which gives you a certain level of credibility in the in the tendering and government contracting space. And of course, certainly in things like care, where authorities are using that framework to manage the commissioning of packages of care. That is the sort of the process that they will use. So when they have a new package that comes up, they will use that framework. So it's important to be in touch with that, to be on that framework and be in touch with, when the authority issues that a package, so that you can respond within an hour rather than within 3 days when that package may have already gone, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think there's many different types of frameworks and DPSs, some single buyers, multi buyers, etc. But one thing's worth saying about a DPS, for example, is it's not just you apply once and if you don't get on it, that's it. Quite often it's open for acceptance rounds month after month, or every 6 months, or every year you can apply again. So you might apply the first time and get rejected because, I don't know, you missed something out, you didn't score highly enough, but you have another opportunity to improve your bid and bid again to get onto it. So it can be a good first cutting your teeth on tendering, getting onto DPSs and frameworks is a good way to build up your tender material.
Yes, absolutely. To emphasize that is yeah, a DPS, if you mess it up the first time round, you can have 5 more goes at it. Obviously, if it's a winner takes all contract and and you don't win it, and that's you done for 4 years on that particular opportunity, potentially. So DPS is a great way to to start to develop your requirements and your sort of business systems and processes accordingly. Okay. Yes, I mean, typically you would want to be asking for feedback fairly quickly. 6 months after a tender project has sort of done, it probably depends on the procurement officer that you're writing to, and it may be the case that the entitlement kind of wanes after a certain period of time, but there is a sort of a final action, which would be a freedom of information request. It would be unlikely that you get an information request granted on your specific feedback, but you can do freedom of information requests on trying to obtain the kind of information on who the contract was won by and what were the relative merits of their contracts and that sort of thing. So that can be a tool to help inform you in the wider kind of scheme of things as to again, just sort of helping you understand why decisions were made and that sort of thing. Again, it's unlikely that you will ever get a request granted to have the winning bidder's bid submitted to you, but it has been known to happen before. And of course, it's not submitted to you, it's just submitted to, it's sort of put out in the public domain. You have to justify that it is in the public interest to release that information. Last question on this. How accurate is the tenderer's value of contracts? Do they base it on actual previous suppliers? Again, most take it with a pinch of salt, really. All tender notices are at the behest of the, and the accuracy of the procurement officer that is putting that information into their form in the first place. Sometimes a 0 value is given. Sometimes a very accurate value is given based on previous spend. Again, the tool that you would use to help you make a more informed decision is asking a clarification question on day one to confirm that it is a £250,000 per annum contract, or is that then broken down into the 3 lots, and how is the split between those 3 lots? If it's a £10 million framework and it's, there are lots of different things on that framework, from architecture to project management to building surveying to quantity surveying, etc. How is that value split up, that kind of thing? So you would ask clarification on that to try to help you understand how accurate the tender's value is. In the list of sort of deciding whether that particular opportunity is right for you, I put the value of the contract lower down the list until you've got that sort of properly confirmed. And I would probably look at the pricing spreadsheet and the specification to establish, okay, can I do the project for this sort of, what would it cost us to do this project? Sorry, what would it cost us to deliver this contract? And does that sort of sit within that kind of initial value space? I think overall it kind of needs to be based on something. So previous supply would be about right, and then the sort of the new budget that's been allocated for that particular contract. Right, so that's the chat questions. Does anybody else have any questions? Would they like to raise their hand or just come off mute and ask a question? No? Okay then. Well, in that case, I hope you've all found that information useful. Just to reiterate, you know, what we've kind of done today is gone through a typical set of tender requirements to help you make more informed decisions to bid or not to bid. We have recorded this webinar, so Sharon will send round a link to that recording, which I think will be on our YouTube channel. And there, yeah, I'll come back to you, Zainab. And there we will have, there are at least the other 2 webinars that we have in our series that are all about helping small businesses to, you know, get ready to tender, understand what it takes, and, you know, hopefully enabling you guys to kind of make more informed decisions about tendering. If you do have any questions, then please reach out to us. We're more than happy to help. And you know, when it sort of comes to the writing stages, again, that's the sort of the main focus of our business, is helping businesses win contracts through supporting with tender writing. So if you do have any questions related to that, then please give us a shout. And also just to highlight again that as of Monday this week, there were something like 125,000 tender notices, whereas the week before there were only something like 20,000. So please go and have a look at findatender.gov.uk, contractsfinder.gov.uk, or our own website, which links both of those lists together, so that you can just refresh your kind of searches on tender opportunities. I think these days there might be a, you know, since the 24th, there might be a need to sort of re-register. But I don't think is it correct, Karen, that you don't need to do that for just looking for opportunities and
To look
expressing
at
interest?
you don't need to log in or anything, no.
Okay, fine. Right, Zainab just had one last question.
Hi. I just wanted to quickly go back to, you know, on the slide that you had about evidence.
Mm-hmm.
And you said about the training matrix and records. Sorry, I just wanted to go back and figure out, what did you mean by a training matrix or records?
Yeah, Sharon, could you just find that slide again so that we've got that? But so it's effectively a training matrix for most businesses looks like an Excel spreadsheet, and you've got all of the different modules, you know, whether it's safeguarding level 1, safeguarding level 2, you know, health and safety, risk assessment, method statement, you know,
training, basically,
moving and handling training, etc., all the way along the top. And then you've got the names of the staff down the left-hand side, which would be probably redacted for a tender submission. And then you've got, you know, quite often that's sort of required. And again, what will take your tender score from sort of 3 out of 5 or 4 out of 5 on that type of question. You know, the question might be, you know, please outline how your staff are appropriately trained, you know, and performance managed for delivering this contract. And you want to make sure that they've got an appropriate level of training. And you might want to add in, you know, kind of make sure that your training exactly meets the specifications. So if you're sort of seeing that an authority is very up on mental health training, then it would be good to make sure that your staff, some of your staff have got, you know, mental health training, etc., etc.
That makes sense. Okay, brilliant. Thank you so much.
No worries. Does anybody else have any last questions? Otherwise, we will bid you all farewell. and look forward to seeing you on the next one.